Good evening, everybody. My name is Jan McVarish, and I'm the Education and Events Director of the Free Speech Union. Thank you all for coming. We should have about 250 people in the room. Looks that way, not that I can see with my glasses on. Excellent. And almost double that number are joining online, which is amazing. It just shows what an issue this is for people. So hello to everybody online. Thank you very much for joining us. We haven't got the chat open because it's a public meeting, so we've turned that off this time. But if you've got any issues with joining or the sound, then just you can message in there to my colleague Esther, and she'll help you sort that out. So we are live streaming, and there'll be a published recording that will go up in a week or so. So if you don't want to be on camera, it might be too late for some of you, go towards the back of the room. That's what we've got on the signs. So the fact that I have to say that... the fact that...
Your glasses on and your hat.
Yes, exactly. The fact I have to say that people talk in terms of not being out about their views on something as basic as the difference between male and female, between men and women, tells you why the Free Speech Union was delighted to be asked to host this event this evening. So we're here today not just to celebrate the publication of a very, very important book, and hopefully you've already bought your copies, although you can buy them afterwards as well. And an important book because it's all about the undermining of women's equality. But we're also here to draw attention to an even bigger problem, and that's the suppression of truth. And I think this issue that Sharron's done such a brilliant job of drawing attention to is just part of numerous ways in which truth at the moment is being suppressed. So the Free Speech Union was launched just over 3 years ago. In that time, we've gone from 0 to 11,000 members. So those individuals pay monthly or yearly subs so that we can press for consistency in upholding people's speech rights. And I think a lot of you here will already be members. If you're not, then there's a leaflet on your chair, and I do really encourage you to join. Our members recognise that freedom of speech is essential to democracy, and even more than that it is essential to the pursuit of truth. And so we've handled over 2,000 cases since we were set up, and our data tells us that while in our second year of operating, 2021, 19% of our cases were related to sex and gender. By the end of 2022, that proportion had grown to 34%, which is, extraordinary, and there's no sign of that changing for now. And by and large, these are not high-profile individuals. They're ordinary workers, students, academics, and as of this week, even soldiers. People who are speaking up in their workplaces or in their children's schools, or in their council chamber, and in many other arenas of civic life, including on social media. So while the Free Speech Union doesn't take a position on women's sports as such, we definitely take a position in defence of those who are silenced or vilified when they want to debate the issues raised by new trans-inclusionary policies. Women such as Sharron Davies and our panellists tonight, Dr. Emma Hilton and Cathy Devine. So for those of you who don't know, and it's hard to believe there are any of you, Sharron Davies MBE represented Great Britain in swimming at 3 Olympic Games. I think that's right. Montreal in 1976 at the age of 13. And if I think about what I was doing at 13, I can't square the two creatures. In 1980 in Moscow, and after returning to competitive swimming, she competed at Barcelona in 1992. And that's not to mention all the gold, silver and bronze medals at numerous Commonwealth Games and European Championships, and the 200 British swimming records that she broke during her swimming career. Since then, she's campaigned tirelessly for sport to be open and accessible to all. So we're here, as I said, to celebrate the publication of Sharron's new book, Unfair Play, The Battle for Women's Sports. And I hope you will have bought a copy by the end of the evening. Her co-author, Craig Lord, is also here in the audience. Well, hopefully we'll hear from him later. And they'll both be signing books downstairs later on. If you're online, you can buy a copy of the book by using the link that Esther's going to put in the chat. So Primrose Hill Books, you can buy your copy there. We're also here, though, to bring together many others who have forced open the curtains on this issue, and in order to shine sunlight on the questions that Sharron deals with in the book. And I'm delighted to be joined by two eminently qualified panellists. So Dr. Emma Hilton, here on my left, is a prize-winning developmental biologist who has advised various governing bodies on transgender policy in sport, including World Rugby. She is director of Sex Matters, which many of you will have heard of. I think lots of you. Is she here? Okay, we'll sing later. Maya Forstater is in the room, apparently. We'll sing Happy Birthday to you later over a glass. We might need a glass of wine first, but it's Maya's 50th birthday today, apparently. So. And Sex Matters, if you don't know, is a UK-based human rights group that campaigns for clarity on the protected characteristic of sex in UK law and in institutions. Cathy Devine is an independent researcher and an expert in sport policy, inequality and human rights for girls and women. She's published widely in this area over the last 15 years, and in the past 2 years has advised a number of international and UK sport organisations, often confidentially, on transgender inclusion and policies that do not compromise equal sporting opportunities for girls and women. So can we please welcome our panel? So I'm going to come to Sharron first in just a second, and then I'll come to Emma and Cathy for their perspectives, but butt in if you want to. We plan to come out to the audience and have plenty of time for that as well, for your questions and comments. Just to say how it's going to work. When the time comes, I'll ask you to raise your hands, and if you can wait for my colleagues, Vinay and Saba, who I think are at the back. Oh, there's Saba and Vinay's at the back. They'll have microphones. And if you wait and speak into the microphone, that would be very, very helpful. We don't expect you all to agree by any means, and I'm sure you'll have lots of questions. But if you do feel really strongly that you want to challenge the panel, then please do so when I've taken you to speak and using the microphone. I'm afraid we won't be able to come to the chat or the Q&A this time online, but I'm sure you can find other ways of expressing yourselves.
Nice way.
Okay, so I'm just going to ask a question of Sharron first. So the book is really impressive. Some people will have read it already. It's packed with detail, evidence, footnotes, appendices. It's got everything. What made you decide to write the book, and how did you work with Craig in order to produce it?
Evening, everybody. Thank you so much for coming. Don't clap too much because I end up in tears. I think it was just that we've been battling for quite a long time, and we just really, really felt like I wanted to produce something which is a sort of reference book to be able to give people power, whether that was a power as a parent to say, protect my daughter, whether that was power for someone who ran a sports club who wanted to protect female category. We wanted to get rid of all the gotchas and all the rubbish and all the lies out there that are constantly peddled, and just put all the facts with all the science and all the references so that it was all there in one kind of very strong, heavy reference book. And it did mean that it was hard going. I mean, Craig, please stand up, because they couldn't see you standing over there. I kind of did the easy bit. I would just rant and rave and talk to him, and he would record everything, and then he would write it down, and then I'd say, right, you've got to go ref all of this, find all these places to make sure that we're not going to get sued. And so, everything had to be very meticulously put there. We worked very closely together for nearly a year. It was very hard work because it was such an intense, book. And I've done several books over the years, but nothing like this. Everything was like, be fit and pregnant, yippee, and learn how to swim. And this was like real serious, heavy stuff. And you know my history. Everybody knows my history. You know that I was around during the whole of that East German era. Every single race that I had was against East Germans who we knew were doping. who were being put through male puberty with the terrible drugs that they were being given through no fault of their own. And the IOC for 20 years did absolutely nothing. And not only were there people like myself and friends of mine that didn't get on medal podiums, whose whole lives would have been different if they'd been able to win the awards they should have won. There was all these poor East German girls that were literally used like guinea pigs. And the IOC have never taken responsibility for not, sorting this out. And then in 2015, they made this ludicrous claim that it makes no difference whether you're a male or female in sport. And you kind of go, so why do we have men and female races if that's the case? And so it was just, I did not want to see, I could see what was going to come. It was like a train coming down the track, and I could see exactly what was going to happen. And it was going to be even worse because with the East Germans, it was only at elite level. It was only on three main sports, which was cycling, which was rowing, swimming, and track and field. With the transgender situation, it was going to be everywhere. It was going to be across every continent, at every level of sport. It was going to be kids that were going to lose their opportunities. It was going to be in America where, girls would lose their chances to get scholarships, to go to universities. It was going to affect everybody if somebody didn't say, hang on, let's just work with the science. So the very first thing we did was to try and write to the IOC, and I had 60 of my friends that were just people I rang over the weekend and said, please, would you sign this letter to the IOC, asking that they do the science first and they work with the science, that they don't just literally kick women's sport to the curb without, doing due diligence. And only 5 of those 60 have ever really put their head above the parapet. But every single one of those 60, I guarantee you would know in this room. And they're very, very high profile, all of them. And that's, I suppose, what's been very frustrating, is the fact that, the vast majority of people do believe in fair sport. And yet we seem to still be in this position. So after all the things that I'd done over the last few years, I just thought, what else can I do? And the book seemed like the obvious next thing to do, really, was to try and put everything in this reference, which people could go, I've got it, I've got this information, I'm going to say that that's not true, and here's the evidence.
And you make a really great point early on in the book, actually, about how in order for sport to be fair and for it to be inclusive, it has to be exclusive.
Well, the whole point of categories, we know this, the whole point of categories is to make sport available and fair across the whole of society. So we have age categories, so that 15-year-olds don't dominate and beat 12-year-olds. We have weight categories in boxing, so a heavyweight doesn't kill a bantamweight. We have, para categories. We don't allow able-bodied people to identify into the Paralympics because that would be unfair. So we have all of these different categories in sport to offer opportunity across society. And the biggest one, which divides all of those as well, is sex, which is binary. And, you can't physically change your sex. You might be able to identify as the opposite sex, which, in my opinion, is the stereotype of the opposite sex anyway, which seems to be what's being promoted in society at the moment. But you can't. So as much as you might want to, you can't identify into a sex category that you don't belong in because you've got an advantage. And that, to me, was incredibly unfair. So it's never been a position where I don't want everyone to do sport. I spent the last 40 years of my life since I retired trying to promote sport, trying to make sure swimming pools don't close, trying to encourage people to be fit and to healthy. And I mean everybody. And I would want everybody to do sport. However, the first milestone for sport is fairness.
So how on earth has it been possible for that most obvious of categories to be the one that gets blurred then?
That's the million-dollar question, isn't it? Mainly because the IOC are beep useless. And they just literally kicked women's sport, as they've always done, to the curb. They used it as a sacrificial lamb to the PC giants of the corporate world. And so, without any due diligence, without any of the science to back it up, they didn't even ask female athletes. In fact, it took 7 years before we asked female athletes what they thought. Sport is predominantly run by men, and they value men's sport. So historically, when we've had, the shark suits in swimming, when Michael Phelps decided it was unfair, it got stopped, literally within months. When they decided that, carbon fiber shoes were unfair, it was stopped within months. When Oscar Pistorius wanted to race with his blades, the men went, nope, you might beat us. Nope, that's not happening. If it's men's sport, it would have been protected. It was women's sport, and it didn't matter. And historically, as the book shows us, women's sport has always had it so difficult. And in very misogynistic sports, traditionally misogynistic sports like cycling in particular, but also cricket, it's been even harder. I mean, I was talking about cricket today. Cricket at the moment in this country still has a self-identify rule. So you just identify. from one day to the next, right into the women's category. And not one single women's test has ever taken part in Lords, ever. So we're still perceived as second-class citizens, really, when it comes to sport. And women are excluding themselves. This is not inclusive, this policy. It's excluding women from their own category. And one of the most heartbreaking things that I get on a regular basis, particularly at this time of year, because all the primary schools are having their sports days, I'm getting calls from mums whose kids are in primary school saying, my little girls come home from sports day, they've done mixed-sex races, not a single girl's won a race at primary school. So what message are we giving little girls? A, they're not worthy of fair sport, and B, get used to losing girls, because that's how it's going to be.
And so the history of women's sport is just fantastic in the book. It's really, really interesting, just what had to be done in order to make it possible for women to compete on an international level. But I wondered the question that struck me was, with East Germany and the doping cheating that went on there, that you obviously had first-hand experience of, that to me that was, you can condemn it, but it's explicable in that they had a clear advantage sort of nationally and ideologically in order, by cheating, they hoped to win more medals.
Which they did, hugely. 92% of all European medals in the women's category.
It's
92%. So, and the IOC went, oh, well, that's just because they're good. They didn't have hardly any men that won any events at all, I mean, honestly, people, it's ridiculous to say that we didn't know. We absolutely knew at the time what was going on, and yet continually it was not, nothing was done about it.
So who benefits now, though? I mean, obviously you can see how certain trans individuals
benefit now.
And so is there anything other than that is beneficial to in other interest groups beyond
I don't think
individuals?
so. I mean, I think we're just about to have, aren't we, the football, and it'll be really interesting to see what happens with the football. Football's been very slow. I mean, males kick 50% harder than females, and this is onto a less dense bone structure. Women have 6 times as many knee injuries because we have a Q angle. Our Q angle is our hips to our knees, which is wider because we give birth to children. And so therefore we have different anatomy. And this means that, in something like football, women are definitely going to come off worse. A lot of the footballers at the moment, we've got 50 in English football at the moment, 50 males are identifying as women in women's football at the moment. And a large proportion of those are goalkeepers. Because, again, they have bigger hands and they can explosively jump. And, so, that's the benefit. So the more explosive the event, the bigger the advantage to being male. It's just an anatomy thing. It's nothing more than that. It's the fact that we're designed to do different things. And we're not better, we're not worse, we're just different, And so it's the frustration of knowing that, again, a mediocre male athlete is going to be able to beat an elite athlete who's trained all their life and made huge sacrifices and deserves their accolades, and they're just going to be pushed aside without there being any science to back that up.
Speaking of science...
Oh, is that me?
That's you. This is where we're going. So what was it that first alerted you to this being an issue?
Oh, well, so kind of 2 things, I think. Back in the mid-2010s or something, you've got people like Fallon Fox, who is a male, an army veteran in the US, beating someone up in an MMA cage. And I don't really know much about MMA. I was kind of like, is that normal? Maybe that's normal. That's what people do. But at the same time, and I think maybe this gets a little bit lost, the kind of Caster Semenya scenario, which is not the same kind of legal and social understanding, but the same biological understanding, which is these are males who are allowed to participate in female sport. And we saw in 2016 in Rio, where the 800-metre podium was 3 males, right? I've got nothing to say about legal or social gender. But we're talking about sport, and we're talking about body, and we're talking about sex. So those 2 things coming together, the idea that we're seeing trans women, males, and males with DSDs who are starting to dominate.
I might need to just explain what that is. So just explain what was going on with Caster Semenya, because I think her case, when that first was, hitting the news, as an outsider, I remember feeling incredible compassion for what
That's the media, though. I mean, the media did not report it correctly, right? So nearly everyone I speak to has no understanding that Caster Semenya was 46XY. They're all told by the media that Caster Semenya has unusual levels of testosterone for a female. Totally and utterly untrue. Caster Semenya has normal levels of testosterone for a male because Caster Semenya is 46XY5ARD. That was not reported. The only newspaper was The Times. Everybody else misreported. And that's what's so frustrating.
But why was that? Because I remember, I completely thought she was a woman, and I thought that it was very tragic because I felt that she was being put under a horrible amount of scrutiny of something very, very intimate. And I sort of, that's what I thought had gone on. And it wasn't until more recently that I realised that all three medalists, as you said, had the same condition as she did, he did, she did.
We don't police speech.
We say Caster Semenya, don't we? That's what we do.
But the fact that, how on earth did that happen? How could you get three people representing different countries, but with the same chromosomal?
Do you want an honest answer? They were scouted.
Okay.
I mean, Sharon's right. There was a slight propaganda war about this, that people were... I remember when I was watching this sports trial and finding out that Caster Semenya was actually male and being, kind of gutted, because she was this... she, whatever. This kind of wonderful, dynamic athlete that had come into, exploded into the spotlight. And the world's press was reporting it as like this. And I think Caster says... It's like a gift from God. My advantage is like a gift from God. And I remember at that point thinking, you're male. That's not a gift from God. That's just being male. Sorry. and so there was a kind of propaganda, a bit, in a deliberate way that we were trying to be slighted or misunderstood about these are male bodies in female sport. And they're the same biology. It's, like I say, the legal and social differences exist. But a trans woman in female sport has the benefit of male development. That's lifelong. It's not just at puberty. It's lifelong. We could detect it in utero. Boys are longer and bigger. They've got wider spinal columns. They've got bigger heads and all that kind of stuff. In childhood, they are taller and heavier. And then at puberty, this gap kind of opens up. And that's the same biology for any male, whether you are a male who later thinks that, you have a female identity, or whether you're a male who later finds out that you're actually male and you thought you were female.
And so why has the science on this been so poor? When you think, you think of sports science as a thing, and you assume that sport is very, very interested in science. So why...
It's not been poor, it's just not been listened to. So, I mean, Emma, the science is not poor. Emma will tell you all about the studies that were available to the IOC even back in 2015. They chose not to listen to a single one of them. They chose to listen to Joanna Harper, who had a study of 8, of which one of them got faster, so they were an outlier, and they got ignored. This was an incredibly flawed piece of work, which went in front of the IOC without any other reference to any other pieces of science and anybody else's voice. So it's not, again, it's the misrepresentation by the media that the science is poor. The science is not poor. The science is very, very decisive. The last one, I think, I'm not sure if it's the very last one. I always say it's the last one whenever I'm doing my interviews, but there was a big one that came out of Brazil in September of last year, and that was after 14 years, and that was one of the largest, and that was even after 14 years, was saying that you can't mitigate the puberty advantage. So it doesn't matter how many pieces of studies we have, it seems to make absolutely no difference to the IOC.
The IOC didn't listen to actual science. They listened to voices, to ideology, to motivated reasoning, and they've done the same in 2021 with their recent kind of guidelines. They have moved away from understanding sports in terms of fairness, in terms of philosophy, and in terms of politics, and in terms of science, into kind of human rights, and let's all be kind. And this is now not what we need from a sports regulator, right? I mean, maybe some people need that from a sports regulator, but women don't want that from a sports regulator. They want a fair competition.
Yeah, so that's really interesting, isn't it? So it does seem as though across all kinds of institutions, the IOC, other sporting bodies, the army this week with the case that we're handling of Colonel Wright. The core value, supposedly, and core purpose of all of these institutions is sort of melting away, and then this other one is coming in its place. So competition, you would think that is the point. Competition and fairness and safety would be the point of a sporting regulatory body. And yet this other one of inclusivity seems to dominate, which is a really strange thing. So how did you make sense of that, Kathy, and what alerted you to it? Did you manage to make sense of it?
Well, I mean, I've worked in sport all my life, and in a career of 2 halves. So the first half was I was coaching gymnastics, trampoline, windsurfing. The differences between males and females is, blatantly apparent. You can't... Everybody who works in sport knows that. And then I was working in sport policy, so including working on women in sport policy for the Sports Council, when I was at the National Federation of Women's Institutes as head of sport, for the National Coaching Foundation. I was on the management committee of the first International Women in Sport Conference in Brighton in the UK. So that was like the first half of my career doing sport development primarily for women and girls. And then for the second half, I've been an academic. And interesting that Emma refers to human rights, because the first paper I published was on human rights in sport. And human rights, this is one of the things that really aggravates me about this debate, is that
She tells me off quite
the
a
other
lot
side, no, I'm not telling you off, Emma. I'm telling off people who go, trans women have to compete in female categories, human rights. And it's like, but the UN human rights infrastructure in all the treaties protects females from non-discrimination and entitles them to equal opportunities on the basis of sex. So that means as compared with males, however they identify. So the whole story about human rights is wrong as well. The story about science in academia, in the humanities, and the story about human rights in the press is just wrong. And so it's about lobbying, advocacy, political intervention, and so on. So that infuriated me. I mean, even in this country, we've had the Equality Act in 2010. We're doing pretty well now here on what's sometimes called Turf Island for our governing bodies of sport. But it infuriated me when I first came to this issue that governing bodies in this country were not using Section 195, to be technical, of the Equality Act, which permits single-sex sport, it permits female sport in sex-affected sports, and it permits the exclusion of trans athletes from female sport. It is clear as the day is long. And yet, governing bodies procrastinate, fear of litigation, oh dear, we have to allow this, human rights, yada, yada, yada. So even the legislation that we've got, the international human rights treaties that we've got, the Equality Act that we've got here, still, the biology, the science, still, I never thought it would happen in sport. I thought, sport will not fall for that. Not a chance, it's so clear as the day is long. So, yeah, that's how I came to it. And I'd published 2 academic papers. 2015, I published a paper called Sex, Sport and Justice. 2016, I published a paper called Sex, Sport and Money, both of them using the demographic variable of sex. 2017, I was made redundant, which gave me a beautiful opportunity, because I was then gifted academic freedom by courtesy of not being employed by a university, to then have a think about... why are we, where we are. And one of the things that truly shocked me, well, it didn't shock me, I knew this would happen, because it's happened all the way through, as Sharron and Craig document in the book, women are ignored. So the impact on female sport and women's sport was totally ignored. Women's organisations weren't consulted, although God help them if they were consulted, some of them, because the establishment women's organisations had all been policy captured. But the grassroots women's organisations should have been consulted in the Sports Council's 2013 trans inclusion policies. None of them were. It was all trans advocacy advocacy organisations. So I thought, with my newly found academic freedom, I'm going to ask female athletes what they think about the IOC guidelines. And so via Sharron, I cascaded a survey to female Olympic athletes. And as Sharron's already alluded to, female athletes don't want to talk about this issue because they get told they are transphobic, they are bigoted, they will lose sponsors, it's career-ending.
So who's telling them that, Cathy?
The people who are telling them that is governing bodies, sponsors, and the kind of general be kind cultural climate, which we're turning around, I think, at the moment. But, you know, that they've heard that loud and clear. And so they didn't want to comment. So to have 19 complete that piece of research was fantastic. Took a while for me to get it published because me and Emma can talk about this till the cows come. At the moment, because obviously but in 2018, sex itself had been cancelled. Biological sex had been cancelled in favour of gender identity, and it was transphobic to talk about biological sex. So that if you try to publish an academic paper which refers to biological sex, your reviewers, and this is the gold standard peer review system for academic journals, your reviewers will say, you've referred to biological sex of trans athletes, that's transphobic. Okay, so basically, getting academic research published is really tricky if you get one of those kinds of reviewers, and then you have to argue with editors, then ask for another reviewer, and so on and so forth. So yet again, women have to do double the work to get the same, you know, to get the same thing done, publish an academic article.
So could you just explain to people, when you say that sex was done away with, what would you mean? Where? How?
Well, it's because those two papers that I published both had sex in the title. You know, sex, sport and justice, sex, sport and money. No problem whatsoever. Sex was a totally accepted demographic variable. And then by 2018, you can't have sex in the title, absolutely not.
But where had that come from?
Journals, academic publishing. Okay. Academic publishing in the humanities, so in philosophy and sociology, as far as I'm concerned.
No, but you know that we're seeing it in sports science now. We have submitted and been rebutted from a sports science journal, the biggest sports science journal in the world, where we talked very neutrally about the advantages of being male and how that cannot be overcome, that, you know, we need fairness for women. And an associate editor did not address our science and just called us transphobes. Just said that we are, I've got some notes, but it doesn't, you know, that we are rejecting this on the basis of your politics and not about what you've said. It's a huge consensus paper. There are lots of sports scientists in there. God knows what they thought about that.
I think they were shocked.
But that's from an editor of the biggest sports medicine journal in the world.
And Sharron, at what point did you pick up on the fact that was there a sort of more open climate that was then shut down, or was this always a very difficult area?
I think a lot of it, as well as the desperation of the athletes as well. You know, phone calls that I would get weekly, daily sometimes, from athletes, from coaches, even from governing body heads, just exasperated with wanting to do the right thing and not knowing what to do, where to go, how to do it. I mean, I just get very frustrated. Like Cathy said, we have the law, you know, we have the Equality Act. So, you know, Mayor Sex Matters tried very hard recently with, I'm sure everyone in this room probably signed, to get the Equality Act made even clearer. When it was written in 2010, without a shadow of a doubt, the word sex meant biological sex. Now we have to add the word biological to be able to, you know, enforce any form of sex discrimination. I mean, it's just ridiculous, really, because everybody knows that's what it meant. But now we're back to that point where we've got to clarify even again. And that shouldn't be the case, but it is. And so, you know, I'm trying very hard behind the scenes to speak to people that I can get access to see if I can push that through government as much as possible. They have a lot on their plate that they're not doing terribly well. And, you know, this necessarily just falls by the by a little bit, but we keep pushing constantly because actually I think this is a much bigger problem than they realise going forward. This is a problem for all our little girls going forward. I mean, the way the little girls at the moment are, you know, being taught that they're second-class citizens is really scary.
Yeah,
In sport, it's really important for little girls to be taught that this is a good route to understanding your body, to understanding your, confidence and.
Yeah, we need everybody to do sport, and we know it's really difficult to get little girls to do sport and to keep doing sport, and this is just yet another hurdle. And as I mentioned earlier, what happens is kids just self-exclude, girls just self-exclude. In places like New Zealand and Australia at the moment, they still allow contact rugby. Well, a girl is going to get a broken neck, and they are going to end up paralysed. And what is happening sometimes when dads turn up with their little girls to play and they realise that there's a male on the other team, they are saying, you're not going on there. And they self-exclude.
And do you think, what I find extraordinary is how we went so quickly from, let's empower girls, girl power, girls can do anything, just do it, whatever the slogan.
They're still pretending to say that.
Yeah, so all of that. But is there any way in which that sort of elided the differences between boys and girls in people's minds, and they thought, were they less sensitive then to the differences? Did it become less difficult, less easy to say there is a difference?
We have a constant battle. So, for example, in this country at the moment, there's 1,000 women that earn their living from sport. There's 11,000 men. Our figures are pretty similar to America. I'm sure if you've read the book, you've seen the figures. But 1% of the American-US sponsorship sports dollar goes to women. 1%. 4% of airtime for sport goes to women. 4%. We say we're getting better. We're getting better a little bit at things like football, rugby and cricket. But a lot of other sports, we're getting worse. So we're growing some of those team sports, but at the detriment of all the other sports. So if I asked people in the room, unless you were a mad swimming fan, and you don't get to answer about that, who the best female swimmer in the UK is at the moment, even though we have 2 gold medalists from our mixed medley relay team and a girl that won 6 European medals last year at the European Championships, you'd struggle to tell me who it is. And that's in one of the biggest participation sports we have in the country. So, the BBC, I have worked for the BBC now for 30 years. The World Championships are on in Japan coming up shortly. For the first time in 30 years, they're sending nobody. So they might take it on red button and we might have a little bit if you go around hunting for it. But with regards to actually trying to show the general public who want to watch on terrestrial television, not on a red button, hardly anyone will watch. And, and this is a sport where we have Adam Peaty, one of our most successful athletes. Swimming was the most successful individual sport from the last Olympic Games. And then they're not even going to show the World Championships. So we're struggling. It's a misconception that we're giving sportswomen more airtime. We're giving some sportswomen in what is traditionally male successful sports more airtime, i.e. rugby, football and cricket.
Although swimming has been pretty strong on the policy.
Swimming has been very strong on the policy, yeah. And I'm incredibly proud of World Aquatics and what they did. Partly, even though we know that the process was already in place when Leah Thomas did what Leah Thomas did, I do think it pushed everybody over the edge. And what I've always been trying to stop, or what I was wanting to try and stop with speaking out, was that we had to have a Leah Thomas in every sport before every sport realised that males are stronger than females. Because we know that. We don't need to have a Leah Thomas to prove that. But I think that's probably one of the things which, did bring it to the attention. It could no longer be ignored, even though the process was already under place. And they did actually speak to the female swimmers, and they gave the female swimmers a voice. And one of the other things that they've done, which I'm extremely proud of, is they've increased the position of females on boards as well. So they've now said 40% of all boards will have females. So, until, in 1981, when I won my medal, there wasn't a single female sitting on any IOC boards, not a single one. And, and in fact, even now, we have the majority, we have a few women sitting on the IOC boards. Most of them are from the Middle East, where sport is obviously huge for women.
No, and the other one thing calls us biofeminists, which, as far as I can tell, means that we're feminists even though sex matters.
You could not write this stuff. You really couldn't. The IOC bring women onto the board and they bring them on from the Middle East. It's just...
So what can be done then to just really quickly and really simply sort things out across the board, so that we're not reliant on a new Laurel Hubbard, a Fallon Fox, so that each one doesn't become a kind of culture wars.
Well, that's what's happening
social
in
media
cycling.
storm.
So we're hoping cycling will be the next to go, but it's taken again 50 males in North America dominating women's cycling before they've gone, oh yeah, well maybe we'll think about protecting the female category. And again, even in the UK, even though British Cycling have recently protected the female category, they're not very strong at doing it and policing it. And secondly, they only listen to trans activists. They had a transgender woman who was caught for cheating when they were competing as a male cyclist, giving them advice. No, I'm sorry, you don't ask advice off of someone who cheated whilst they were competing. Because to me, that's just immoral. Sorry.
So that's the top end of things, I suppose. But the other end is, what's happening in schools generally, and sport being a part of that. So, like you said, girls not winning races. Yeah, I mean, I heard, so a couple of years ago, my house backs onto a primary school where my kids went. And I heard a sports class going on in the playground. At the end of the class, I heard the teacher say, all the boys take the equipment to that corner. And it just struck me because I was thinking, that's quite straightforward. You can see why they organise things in that way. And then I couldn't believe it, but I heard them say, and all those who identify as girls take the equipment to that corner. And this is a primary school, so going up to 11 years old.
And this is what's happening, though, isn't it? I mean, sure, a lot of you in the room have, this is not happening to men. This is not happening on the National Health Service website when they talk about prostate cancer. They do not get called penis owners. We get called, ovarian. And why is this happening to women? There's an underlying darkness to all of this, which is very misogynistic. Bless my mum. When my mum passed away 4 years ago, she left me the money which has enabled me to fight this. Without it, I would have had to sell my house. When my mum bought her first house with my dad, she wasn't allowed on the mortgage because she was a woman, even though the money for the deposit on the house was my mum's. So I just know that she would be quite proud. It's so wrong. And sorry, I knew I'd cry. There's room in sport for everybody. There really is. There's room in sport for everybody, no matter how you identify. We want you to do sport. I want Leah Thomas to be swimming and to be training and to be doing sport and to be healthy. I just want 52% of the world to have fair sport as well. I don't understand how that is not being done. I just can't get my head around how we are so dispensable.
Right. Let's come out to the room. Vinny and Saba, if you want to come up and get microphones. I'm going to stand up so I can see people. Okay. So what I would suggest is if you've got... So put your hands down, and if you've got a direct question... For this first round, let's just see if anybody's got direct questions to any of the panellists, and we'll do those first, and then we can keep them quick, and then we can move on to, comments, hopefully not too long as the evening goes on, but let's go for quick questions first. Okay, there's a chap there in the navy blue shirt with the glasses. Stand up.
As a secondary school teacher, I've unfortunately seen... for example, the School of Sexuality Education draw false equivalences between people like Caster Semenya and someone like Phelps with his reach, etc. And I just wanted to ask the panel, would you prefer teachers to... Because there's a rule about impartiality around teachers. Teachers should be impartial politically. Unfortunately, I've seen evidence of that not being the case, teachers not being politically impartial. So would you rather have... that enforced again properly, teachers be politically impartial, or would you rather see teachers like myself, even though I'm a wee bit scared, teachers like myself maybe stand up more? What would you rather see?
Well done you. Yeah.
Enough of the clapping. We're going to run out of time.
Please don't clap.
Our schools are a hotbed, aren't they? You know, our young people are so impressionable. And every single generation has something where they need to be on a crusade. You know, and I think that we've got fantastic rights across society. And the problem is we've almost now got this sort of faux thing which has come in. And I do worry very hugely. I mean, I try not to. I make sure that I'm educated with all the other aspects that go, you know, with gender ideology. Sport is my space. You know, I understand it back to front, upside down. I know all the science. These guys are amazing. They've made sure that I'm aware of everything. I think it's outright dangerous to teach in schools that biological sex doesn't exist. I just don't understand. You know, let's just take it, you know, to the nth degree. I mean, we need to make sure that young lads have prostate exams. We need to make sure that young girls get cervical cancer checks. You know, if they get confused about their biological sex or they write on their medical records that they're a woman and they're a man when they're biologically the opposite sex, they're going to miss, you know, the screenings and all sorts of things. So I think there's just certain areas like sport, like medicine, like statistics, which have to be sex-based. But I still think there's space for us to be kind, you know, and there's space for us to be human with each other and all that sort of stuff. But I think lying to children will turn around and bite us in the arse in a few years' time, massively.
What do you think about biology teaching? Is there scope for sort of educational interventions?
I think I'm not a biology teacher. I lecture to undergrads and master's students about, you know, things like genetics and sex and inheritance and all those kinds of fairly normal things that we thought were.
Do you get pushback from undergraduates on this stuff now?
No, I mean, mostly, honestly, I get lots of undergrads saying to me, embarrassingly, my dad follows you on Twitter.
They probably follow Sharron as well. And then I think you're great, thanks. And so then obviously I forward those messages to the head of the course and they get top marks. No, I'm too But I don't think certainly at my level of teaching, I don't think they're quite so kind of, you know, spongy as maybe we think. They're starting to think for themselves. And I've certainly seen in the last couple of years, I mean, I'm teaching now about, you know, very openly saying to endocrinology students, you're thinking about insulin and all that kind of stuff. Let's think about testosterone. Let's think about sex and let's do this. And they, you know, they're there to learn. And they are the actual facts. How males develop, how females develop is not the same thing. And you can't switch and you can't change and you can't reverse it. And they're actually pretty, you know, they're open to it. But they want the facts. I kind of think people still know, maybe, do they? I think you would do if you're trying to race somebody. Yeah. Right, yes, the chap with the beard down the front here.
Sorry. It is a technical question, and I'm asking the sports scientist. Even though I'm 55, I was a boxer in my 30s, I'm 6 foot, I have a reach of 25 inches. What chance would I be of being the British heavyweight women's champion?
10 years ago, no doubt. 55, you might be pushing a little bit.
I'm just going to add one thing on the boxing, though, because it's really important, actually. The Boxing Federation, the World Boxing Federation, straight away, when they talked with their boxers, and this is what's really fascinating, because it was the men that decided, right? The men turned around and said, we will not box transgender men, i.e. females, because we will kill somebody. And we will be done for manslaughter. So World Boxing turned around and said, right, we will not allow, you know, males and females biologically to fight each other at all. We will set up extra leagues and we will try to help, and which is fantastic, and so they should. But it was really fascinating that it was the men that decided, not the women.
You wouldn't even have
so
to
you wouldn't
shave
stand a
your
chance because they wouldn't let you in.
Right, maybe if we take some at the back so we don't forget the back. Yes, right at the very, very back. There's a lady on the very back row.
Hi, I'm Jan from Object. Picking up on your figure of 52% women should be involved in sport, I wonder if you'd agree that actually if you count in the children that some women are responsible for, it goes up to 67%.
Oh, really?
Remember that 90% of single parents are female, and in some areas of London, like, for example, Kentish Town, half the households are headed by a single parent. It becomes a much bigger picture. And so I think it's even more important that women are involved in sport, because if they are, then their kids will be.
Yeah.
I
was talking demographically about 52% of the world being female. So I wasn't really talking, I mean, I would want everyone, to do sport as much as possible. I think sport is one of those amazing things that teaches us resilience. I was doing an interview earlier on, and they were saying, what's the most important thing that sports taught you? And it's taught me to be brave. It's taught me to not be frightened of failing. So when you fail, you learn, don't you? And if we don't teach our kids that they should be brave enough to go and fail, then they don't learn. They don't take any risks. And so that's, sport has so many fantastic lessons that are so useful in life.
Yeah, absolutely.
Right. So any other straightforward questions before we go on to... Okay, so lady in the blue shirt.
Thank you. I've got a good friend who plays hockey 5 times a week, spends all her disposable income on her hockey. She's not professional, she's not elite, and the policy in her club is inclusion, transgender inclusion, which she feels is female exclusion. What about women who are not in elite sport, who are not, the NGBs don't really seem to care about, the policy it's much vaguer. How do we sort of tackle that at a kind of amateur level, or, right down at the bottom?
Yeah,
how do we
it's a huge problem. It's exactly what's happening is that the NGBs at the moment are sort of going, okay, we'll give you elite sport, we'll ring fence the elite sport, and then we'll just chuck the rest of you over to the side, all those that want to do it, recreationally. And, your friend is a prime example. And, I in the book we stated, we put a case of someone that was a hockey player that actually was playing up against a man and eventually walked off the pitch because they couldn't play. It was impossible. It was also dangerous again, because you've got that dynamic hitting power, which is, going to be extremely dangerous. The other thing we haven't touched on is things like parkrun. I mean, that just breaks my heart. So, parkrun is about inclusion. I get that. Everybody's supposed to be out there. Come dressed up as an elephant, run. I don't care. The whole point is just be there, do exercise, have fun. However, how difficult is it on the entry form online to have 2 extra boxes? Transgender men, transgender women, and we have 2 more course records. But at the moment, we're losing records every single weekend. Women's records are being taken by people that are male, that are identifying by ticking a box, self-identification, and parkrun have no problem with it. And they turn around and say it's because it's supposed to be not competitive. Well, then why have a record?
And it's completely competitive when that guy won the Edinburgh course record last week, and they were just, yay! Apologies, I forget his name.
But it's a lie, isn't it?
Of course it's competitive.
It's a total and utter lie, and it's the easiest thing in the world to add 2 boxes. Why would that be? And when I spoke to them, or spoke to some people about it, they said to me, oh, well, it's all self-reported, so we could have 15-year-olds winning the under-10s, and we could have 30-year-olds saying that they're 70 and winning. Okay, then why don't you say online you shouldn't do that? And if we notice that you're actually 20 and you're winning the 70s, we're going to chuck you out. At least try to put people off from doing that. Don't just turn around and go, do what you like. It's otherwise, I just don't see the point. Either marshal it in some way, or don't marshal it at all, don't have any records. That was what I fed back to them. I said to them, you've either got to be fair, or you've got to do away with the records altogether and just have people run together, and that's it.
Yeah, when I do it, I basically try to chase down any woman who looks roughly my age from the back. And then if I do manage to get past her and she looks younger, I'm really, really pleased. And if it turned out to be a bloke, I don't know what I'd make of it. I'd be really pleased. Right. Yes, there's a woman in the yellow dress halfway up. Sorry, if you stand up and then he can see you. Yellow dress and, shirt, yes, black jacket, that's it.
Do we think some of the uphill struggle in getting the women's rights highlighted is because we're essentially asking people who feel marginalised to give up opportunities, even though they shouldn't have them? So it's saying to them, you've gained this opportunity to do something you perceive great after feeling like you've struggled. You just need to do that. They might find that difficult to do. That doesn't mean they can not do it, but how can we maybe get people to reframe it of maybe I need to change to enable 50% of the world to be able to still have those opportunities.
Do you know what's really fascinating, though? A lot of transgender women and transgender men that I know, a lot of them opt to race for their sex anyway. So in America, when Leah Thomas was winning the women's races, we had a transgender man, a biological female, who was also racing at the same NC2A championships, but they were female, identifying as male, racing with the women, because they did not stand a chance racing with the men, so they carried on racing with the women. The women had no problem. So providing no one's on testosterone and getting an unfair advantage, I do not mind how anyone would identify next to me. It's all about the biology. You know the gotcha. We get the gotcha all the time, don't we, about women are what we're supposed to look like. At the end of the day, it doesn't matter what we look like, it's what we are. It's the biology that we are. This is not about lipsticks and short skirts and, I can never get my head around when they say live like a woman. What the hell does that mean? I don't, I hardly ever put a skirt on and a pair of I can't even get my feet in high heels after COVID. I don't oh God. What is living like a woman? I don't, you either are a female or you're not. That's it. So I think there's ways and means that we can, find space for everybody. But I think that, unfortunately, the transgender women that I know that go into women's spaces to win races very much want to win those races. And they know they wouldn't win those races in the men's races. And it doesn't bother them.
And I think just to add to that, that shows us, that asymmetry shows us exactly who benefits from this and how sexist it is. Because enabling trans athletes to compete in opposite sex categories asymmetrically disadvantages all females, including trans men and females who identify as non-binary, because we had a number of non-binary identifying females at the Olympics, all competing in the female category. No surprise. So, and then asking trans men to compete in male categories would disbenefit them because they take female disadvantage into male categories. So they don't do it. If they want a competitive career, they stay in the female category as long as they're not on T.
Yeah.
So it's this asymmetry, to me, that uncovers the underlying sex discrimination. Take away the labels and you see underneath that males want to compete in female categories. And that is the underlying sex discrimination, which should be protected by the Equality Act in this country and so on.
We have things like the Boston Marathon now, right? The Boston Marathon runs 3 races for men. So men can go in the men's race and win, they can go in the non-binary race and win, and they can go in the women's race and win. Where do we go? We have nowhere we can opt into. Nowhere.
Right. Oh my goodness, so many hands. Right, okay. So I tell you what, we'll sweep forward. So if we go, Vinay, if you go to Maya.
Happy birthday!
Where is Maya? Yay!
I just wanted to pick up on something Sharron said. You said we tried very hard to get the government to clarify the Equality Act. That's about the Westminster Hall debate that took place in Parliament just a couple of weeks ago. It's not the end. We didn't expect them at the end of that debate to say, yes, we're going to do it. The ball is very much still in play. And Rishi wants to go into the next election saying that I'm the only person who knows that 100% of women don't have a penis, and that idiot over there thinks 99.9% of women have a penis. If he wants to say that, he needs to clarify the Equality Act, and we're going to be keeping on at him and asking you to send him postcards and keep on at him. It's still in play, and until the end of this government, we're going to try and make that happen.
We've been trying hard, haven't we, behind the scenes, talking to different ministers, one in particular who's very much on side. And if we can get that, then we're in a much stronger legal position. And believe me, I will then take on any sporting body I possibly can. Because the moment I take one on and win, which we will, then they will all have to follow suit. But we shouldn't have to do this.
No.
What is there? Do you have are there people in the Labour Party who are receptive on this, or is that?
Rosie, bless her.
Well, apart from Rosie,
Tonya.
And Tonya. Yeah, Tonya. There's a few. There's a lot more that are quiet about it. There's very few that are loud about it.
The policy, though, they have said that they support single-sex spaces, for women. So I think the push would be to get both parties to clarify what their policy actually is going to be going into the next election, because it's ripe for that. Because, you know, you can push the Tories with the fact that that Labour have said we support single-sex spaces, and you can push the Tories, the Conservatives, with the fact that they've not actually clarified sex in the Equality Act yet. But the thing is, one of my bugbears about that is you don't even need to do that for sport. It is there in black and white. It does not need clarifying. It is there. The sports councils, in my view, have a role to tell governing bodies who they invest in that they will provide equal opportunities for female athletes.
Well, they kind of have, softly, haven't they? But they haven't done
Softly,
it. They've done it softly, right? So they've done it, they've given them instruction, they've advised them, they've done this, they've done that. They've not said we will remove sports council money if you don't do it. And that's what we've been trying to get them to do. You know, we've been trying to do all these things behind the scene, believe me. You know, apart from the hiatus of working very hard with Craig, we have been doing this constantly to see what we can, you know, force through and you know, get done. Yeah. But it is like running into a brick wall a lot of the time.
Which is extraordinary because, you know, I think this is one of the issues where men really understand this, what's going on.
Yeah, except for sportsmen have been total and utter cowards on the whole. Yeah. So a few, daily. But, you know, the vast majority have literally said nothing. And they know, and that's why the polling, the anonymous polling is so important. I mean, I'm really happy for any sporting body to anonymously poll all of their athletes. Because it's not just, you know, the women aren't the ones that are just going to turn around and say we want fair sport. The men will say it too. They just won't say it publicly.
Maybe Gary Lineker could speak.
Not much chance of that.
Right. Yes, there's a chap with blonde hair.
I would say strawberry blonde, but I normally get called...
My apologies.
Thank you for that. Firstly, Sharron, my dad used to fancy you in his...
Do you know what? Do you know, at least you didn't say your granddad.
I have a young dad. I have kind of a broader question for all four of you, really, because I know in my dad's day, I remember him saying that the Marxists outside the Students' Union at Manchester Uni, they were kind of laughed at because everyone knew that the Marxists would never get near power. But what I'm seeing at the moment, and obviously you guys are as well, is I feel that there has been like an ideological takeover of the institutions, which is a bit more scary than, say, you know, a couple of people just protesting outside another place. So, and I know this seeps into all areas of society, including sport. And I feel it's part of the problem you guys are talking about. So I just wondered what you thought the causes of this were.
Yeah, that's a really hard question.
All right.
Well, we all know it. But it's very hard to speak about it. I tried to get it in my book and they wouldn't let me. It's really difficult, isn't it? It's the capture behind it. So, you know, wherever you go with this, it always ends up on money. It's always money. It's always about how people and organisations and huge companies will make more money. And that's the sad truth of it, really. It's not the collateral damage at the bottom. It's who's going to make huge amounts of money out of this.
But why will they make... How does that work in sport?
Because they can tick their social justice, social equality box without actually having to do anything, really, apart from hang a load of flags down Regent Street. Okay? They don't actually have to challenge the embedded sexism, racism, and so on and so forth. So it's kind of an easy win for corporate, you know, for corporate culture. And it tells you, you know, what tells you that that is the case is that this has emanated from North America, you know. So it's come over here from North America, and we're busy batting it back, and we're doing a really good job. But that policy capture is exactly as Sharron says about protecting the bottom line, protecting the purse. There's loads of new niche markets.
But that's got absolutely nothing to do with Marxism as well.
Well, not true Marxism, is it? But yeah.
Which is just, it's insane how this has become an identity politics out of what should have been a material reality analysis. Right?
If you could just pass your mic to the lady in the green dress behind you.
Hi, hello. Do I have to stand up? Hello. It wasn't really a question. It's just something that I've learned over the years is that this movement, the trans movement, seems to be really, really backed by women who say they're feminists. And it's just really upset me, and it angers me tremendously. And as a brown bi woman, not in my name, it's like I'm absolutely disgusted and disappointed in that it's really been taken over by women who think they're doing the right thing. And this be kind kind of sentimentality that a lot of us women have in us innately, but I just can't understand how feminists, they call themselves feminists, can't see what they're doing, how they're betraying their own sex. And it's not really a question, it's just something I wanted to say to everyone.
Well done. Is it like a form of handmaiden thing that's going on? I don't understand it. Maybe it's because I'm not that kind of person. I just don't get it. I don't get this.
Back in which hands? In which hands they had women doing the men's job, right? Identifying the women that would be, brought before the witch hunter who was a man, and they would be marked and, floated or drowned or whatever. And it's the same thing. Simone de Beauvoir, the oppressors don't get far enough if they don't have collaborators within the oppressed class.
And that's part of our problem in sport, is trying to get the women to come together, strong enough without, we occasionally have the weak link. So, for example, in the cycling, that we saw last year, the girls were all strong together, and the girls behind the scene came together and they went to World Cycling then trumped British cycling. And that was the fact they came together. It's one of the things I say in the book is we need unions. We need something which gives power to the voices, to the athletes. I mean, at the moment, the IOC think, what was the piece about how much money, how many millions was in their salaries we put out this week on my tweets? I'm sure some of you will follow my tweets anyway, but it was out there. It was ridiculous.
500 million, wasn't
it? Yeah, on their salaries, for the IOC. 4% of their budget goes back to the athletes.
I think so. Just your thing about the unions. I mean, I'm represented by Free Speech Union, I think I said, and it's just fantastic. That's what you need. You need something which means that you then actually kind of pursue.
But
these issues.
Women are kind of brought up, aren't we? I mean, to somehow put ourselves at the bottom of the list. Budge over because you're less important. And that's kind of what's been happening, and that's what's been allowed to happen, and I've been trying to push back, and I know these girls want this. Whenever we do polls, the polls are hugely in favour of wanting fair sport. And that's why I've been trying to get more of the men to come out, because the men have a strong voice. They get listened to a little bit more, but they shouldn't, but they do. They get listened to a bit more by the boards. And so if we can get men to be a bit more vocal for us, if we can get all those dads, who want their daughters to have fair sport to be vocal for us, that it's just strength in numbers, which is what we've got to do. We've got to push back, and we shouldn't have to have the Leah Thomases to push back, and that's what seems to be happening. And I was always trying to stop that. With the 20 years of the East German situation, I was trying to stop having to have these obvious examples before we were saying, hang on, let's just use the science, let's use our common sense, and that's all I've been, because I didn't want all these girls to miss out on their opportunities, miss their medals, miss their scholarships, miss the right to put on their CV that they made the GB team or whatever, which actually makes their CV rise to the top of the pile. It's really important they get those opportunities. It isn't about necessarily just winning the most important competition in the world. It's about all the other things that come with it, which will help their careers, and so many of them just give up because they feel like they can't do it, they're not getting the support. Yeah.
Can I just add to that as well? Because I think it's a little bit overplayed that it's mainly women pushing it, because let's face it, the governing bodies of sport are primarily males, and it's them that have made the decisions. And I think, there is the thing, I feel your pain in academia in relation to feminism, but I would call myself an academic feminist. And, we know, don't we, that women so-called internalise their own oppression. So I think it's perhaps kinder to women to say they have to go along with the system, or else they will get cancelled. They are not allowed to not speak out, So, but when all the athletes that are surveyed, no, they don't want trans women in female categories, without a doubt. But they have to be asked anonymously, as Sharron says.
Yeah.
And I would just like to say, I take your point. I'm a Labour woman. I'm all for unions. The women that organised around cycling did so because people like you speak out. You are one of those union heads that allows those women.
So funny, I never thought myself ever.
No. You give them a voice, you give them a figurehead, you give them a space, and they might not tell you. I mean, you know who they are. They might not be public, but you are one who is driving this, and so don't underestimate. We are doing it. We are doing it. Women are doing it.
Absolutely.
I don't think we need men.
I just wish some of the men were more vocal because the men don't get pushed back so much. So the hate that we receive online is extraordinary. I mean, it's just extraordinary. And I don't read it, and it doesn't. I have got quite a thick skin. It doesn't. When they attack my family, it really hurts. Anything else, they can attack me as much as they like. I don't care. I have enough belief in myself. But when they attack my family, I find that very, very hard. And they do it. They do anything and everything to stop me from having my voice. And what they don't realise is the more that they attack me, the louder I will get.
Right. Mike, who's here. Let's go for some quickish points now, so we can fit everybody in.
I'm Mike. I've been shouted at in a pub in Heather Green for defending the rights of women to be identified to be women. That's as far as it's got with me. But the conversation has veered in the way that I thought it would, because I think this is in fact. In the end, this isn't actually about women's rights in sport. There's something else happening, which is a concerted attack on Enlightenment values, on the idea of a society based on, not on free speech, but on a word we haven't heard, which is empiricism, which is evidence-based decision-making. And it's part of something much, much broader. So I don't know what your thoughts are on that. And it's got to, I think this has got to be fought at a very high political level. So a specific question: have you thought of maybe running as an independent candidate in a bike?
I don't think I could deal with it. It's yeah, party of one.
Door for you.
Let's take a few now. There's somebody. Okay, yes, the woman who I can't see you because you're little. Yes.
Hi. Yes, thanks. The media keep on referring to trans women as she and her. Is there anything we can do to force them to...
Yeah, do you know what's really interesting with this is that I tried, like everybody in this room, I have tried my very best to be as fair and as honest and as kind, right? We hate that word, but we use it, to anybody and everybody, because I don't want to cause offence. I'm not transphobic. I absolutely agree with people identifying however they like. I do believe this is about stereotypes. I don't believe, I believe it's a cultural thing. It's no longer, it's not a sexual thing, because male and female can be anything. You can dress any way, behave any way, have your hair any way, have your lipstick any way you want to. It doesn't change your biological sex. So it's a cultural thing that's being promoted. And it's like the new Barbie film. Oh my God. It's like, we just, and it all seems to have started with the whole Kim Kardashian thing, when everybody had to be this hypo-feminine, idea of what a woman actually was, rather than all the years that we fought for a woman to be anything they want to be, and be pilots and astronauts and farmers and whatever they want to be, And now we're all supposed to go back to being this hyper-sexual idea of what a female's supposed to be. So, yeah, I forgot your original question, so sorry.
Okay, if you just... the lady in front of... in there. Yeah, great.
Hi. So the question I wanted to ask was...
You don't have to, but it would be good.
Thank you. So when I was younger, I'm not very much younger than you, but I am. Obviously, you were possibly in the first Olympics that I actively watched, and I've noticed that the people that have been most supportive of those athletes are of your generation, the Dailies, the Sebastian Coe, etc. The ones like 10 years later, like my generation, have been very quiet, which is really disappointing. But with, obviously, in America, we have Riley Gaines, and you said that elite sport gave you bravery. Do you think there's something specific about swimming, maybe, that brings that out? Because, it is you here, and it is Riley in the US, and everyone else is really quiet. I mean,
we've got a few cyclists. We have some amazing brave cyclists that are speaking out.
Fair enough.
Yeah, absolutely.
It's the athletes that do have a profile, like the Paula Radcliffes and, you know... Maybe
Paula did for a while.
See,
And Paula was one of those 5, and initially, who did stick her head up, but then she put it down very quickly again because it was affecting her work.
Okay.
And so that's the difficulty you've got, is that the trans activists are vile with the way that they treat you. They don't do it to men. They don't do it daily, right? Not. They just do it to people like myself and Paul or whatever. And so what they do is they ring every single job that you've got, every single company you work for, every single charity you've ever worked for, and they do it over and over and over again from many, many different people. And they make it so difficult that the companies just don't want the hassle. Even if they agree with you, which many of them do, they literally don't want the hassle and they don't want the negativity. So they make it so difficult, and they do it to women. They don't do it to men.
But what is it about you specifically? I mean, you've spoken that, you know, times were really hard. Why do you think that you're the person that is able to just put it all out there and be damned to the consequences, whereas other people that were elite athletes at the top of their game don't? Basically.
Partly because of the East German situation. So that very much affected me personally. And I saw, you know, a generation of my friends who missed out on places. I have friends that were 4th behind 3 East Germans, and no one's ever heard their name. I don't know, some of you who are big sports buffs will have heard of Kathy Cook, come Kathy Smallwood. Phenomenal 400, 200 runner, okay? And Kathy would have won so many medals. Kathy held the British record for 30 years, 400, until Christina Horrigu beat it on the track not very long ago. And yet, how many people across the UK know who Kathy Cook is, Kathy Smallwood? You know, and so she was beaten by... So it's those people that I don't want to see it happen to again. I've had 40 years of very good earning capacity. I own my house, just about. I had this little bit of spare cash. I knew that it was going to affect me. I didn't think it was going to affect me quite as much, but I knew it was going to affect me a little bit. And I just thought I couldn't, with good conscience, sit back and not say anything. And then I suppose what happens is that it just becomes a bit of a pyramid, and you just keep getting asked, and you keep getting asked, and it just gets bigger and bigger, and you're kind of in it or you're out of it. And I just decided I was in it, and that was it, you know, so...
Okay. Craig, do you want to just... can we get the microphone to Craig? I'm curious, have you experienced any kind of blowback from...
Yes, I'm a Nazi, white supremacist, transphobe, and various other things, all of which I reject completely. So I do get that, but not as much as the women did, and that's the point. You know, it doesn't affect me as a, you know, and they can't cancel me because I'm no one, but they can cancel you. Yeah. But they can't because she argues back. Yeah. And so that's the thing. Don't be quiet. Please don't be quiet. Yeah. Keep going. It started with your statement about the Free Speech Union, and it comes down to truth. All of the stuff where, I don't know, the teacher is over there. Great question. I think we mentioned politicization of these things. It's about truth. We should be able to tell children in schoolrooms, this is biology. This is the reality of it. That's truth. It's not politics. So we need to stop being told it's about politics and so on. It's not. It's about truth. We all need to speak it. So that's how we win.
As I was finishing the book yesterday, I really, really love watching sport. But the thing the points that I absolutely love it are these points where it becomes historic, where, you know, you think, right, that person has put that marker down, and that it must be so important that that's an accurate record that then will stand until the next person.
Yeah, that was kind of the point of the whole book, you know, was to try to put all these things down in a book to get rid of the gotchas. You know, the stupid gotcha about Michael Phelps. You know, Michael Phelps is, what's Michael, 6'4", 6'5"? Everybody else in that final with him was the same height. You know, had the same rough lung capacity. You know, he won by less than 1%. There is no competition that says someone that's got big feet or long arms, right? That is not a category in sport. The category is sex.
And not a single man, which is the fact, not a single man I've ever heard who covered swimming for over 30 years, not a single man has ever complained that it's unfair. Look at him.
Yeah. You know, I mean, because, you know, it's exactly the same with the women. I'm quite tall, I'm 5'10", but I'm not by far the tallest swimmer. Swimmers are a tall breed, just the same as basketball players are a tall breed, volleyball players. You're not going to get a 6'3" gymnast. It's not going to happen. So to be the best and to be the elite in your sport, your physiology has got to kind of fit the sport. It's got to fit the dynamics of the sport that you're doing. So, these gotchas are just garbage. And I wanted to put all of those in the book to be able to show that when they throw these things at us, we can fight back. We can say we can give them the truth. We can give them the science. We can't allow them to baffle us with garbage. It's just, that was the point of trying to arm everybody, as many people as possible, with the facts.
Okay, right, there's a lady in pink. She's a woman, apparently.
I am. Lovely T-shirt. I want to come back to something you said, Sharron, and it concerned me because if a woman has been taking testosterone and she still wants to race against fellow women, I'm friends with a trans woman who is petite, but she says to me, look at my physiology now. The testosterone has had a huge impact on her, and that is not going away. So my point is, even if you've got women that are identifying now, although they're identifying as men, but they are female, but they've been on testosterone, they have got a huge...
Yeah, well, they shouldn't with laws and rules, they shouldn't be allowed to compete, sadly. So if she's taken, and she's now a she again, yeah, so she identifies as she. So if she has taken testosterone, and unfortunately it's the same as East German situation, isn't it? She shouldn't really be allowed back into the competition because she will have a benefit. That's the important reason for the open category as well. Don't forget, and again, it never gets talked about because females don't matter. But any transgender men who are biological females had nowhere to race until you create an open and inclusive category. And it gives them somewhere for them to go, not in the boxing, because they won't be allowed to, because something terrible will happen. But, in let's just say the men's 100, they have got somewhere that they can go and compete, whereas at the moment they haven't. And we have the TUE situation, which is all a bit of a minefield in sport, to be honest with you. But that it does enable them to identify however they like and be able to go and race somewhere. So again, it's about inclusion is important and enabling everyone to have somewhere to go. And this isn't just all about transgender women. It really isn't. And yet it's been made all about transgender women who want to come into spaces and win prizes. It should be about trying to find spaces for everybody.
Yeah. Right. Okay, if you pass it to the lady here.
I just wanted to ask Emma a question. You said that your students, who are presumably science students, seem pretty clued up with reality. So would you say, and maybe other academics in the room would know, would you say that actually a lot of the pushback, the real trans activists on campuses are not science students? Are they more likely to be humanities students who don't necessarily know what they're talking about?
Have we got any humanities teachers in the room?
I
was a humanities student.
I don't mix with humanities students. No, I take your point. I think as a scientist, I have been somewhat protected, and Kathy maybe has a different perspective to me. But as a scientist, I felt pretty protected for a very long time, right? Because I didn't get much pushback. You're just saying, this is what sex is, and this is what sports numbers are, and all that kind of stuff. And it didn't really affect me. I think there's been a lot of spurious and malicious and mischievous complaints about me, but nothing that my department or indeed entire university wasn't able to just say no. She's a scientist. She speaks nicely, and she's very neutral, blah, 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 and your dad follows her on Twitter. So, but I think humanities students and humanities departments are both vulnerable and also the leaders in this whole thing. It seems to me that the sciences are kind of going, can we keep that over there, please, and let's just do our science bit. Maybe Kathy has a different view from humanities.
Well, humanities is very definitely culpable in this respect. I'll give you a quick example. So, Sport Canada commissioned me to interview some of their high-performance athletes. 25 completed a survey. I interviewed 10 of them. And it was basically about what they thought about a very extreme trans policy, which is the Canadian Centre for Ethics in Sport policy, which says that even in elite sport, trans women should be able to self-identify into female categories. So about that and about the 2021 IOC guidelines. However, an activist organisation in America, strangely, and we wondered if that was to do with defamation law or something like that, called Athlete Ally, tried to get my research cancelled, and they constructed an open letter, and various academics from the humanities signed that letter. And to give you an example of what it said in that letter, it says, the term biological males is a code for a trans-exclusionary position. And lots of nonsense like this. And it ended up saying other misleading terms like puberty-related male advantage, primes participants, and it ended up saying, we urge Sport Canada to withdraw its support and funding for Cathy Devine's transphobic and deeply unethical survey. Luckily, that did not happen. But I have to say to you that one of the academics who signed that letter is Dr. Madeleine Pape, who is responsible for rolling out the IOC trans inclusion policy. And that is a major problem. So she is a sociologist. She is working for the IOC on the current 2021 framework for trans inclusion in sports. And she signed that letter. And she will not permit you to talk about biological sex, and she comes out with all the cis stuff. So yes, there is a very big problem in the humanities, which is why I get reviewers' comments such as I described earlier. But we're still winning. Yeah. We're still getting it.
Was it Athlete Ally that cancelled Martina? Yeah, it was, wasn't it? Yeah, that after she said...
You read the book. I've given her some space in the book, haven't we?
Yeah. I don't think that cyclist should be like this.
And what's frustrating, what's even more awful, is that she ran. She was a pretty average runner, but...
Only in the heats, wasn't she?
Yeah. She ran for Australia.
Yeah.
So I'd love to know if she would have given her place up at the Olympic Games at the very last moment to a male that identified the week before.
Yeah.
No, because
her whole career's come off the back of the fact that she was in the Olympic Games, working for the IOC. So it's that hypocrisy which I find very upsetting, to be honest with you. Do you know what? When you mentioned the testosterone, that was interesting. I watched. I did a documentary years and years ago. I took Gracie when she was a tiny weeny baby to Germany, to East Germany, to do this documentary with Petra Schneider. It was absolutely fascinating and horrendous what we saw. But on this video that I watched yesterday, was sent to me. Petra said at 14 she was given testosterone, and in that first 6 months of taking testosterone, she took 17 seconds off her 400 IM. So, I mean, that's what testosterone does.
Yeah. Well, as the mother of teenage boys, it happens overnight.
Yeah.
And it carries on happening into their 20s, as far as I can see.
And they start grunting at you, don't you? They don't do, how was today? Fine.
Or picking you up. There's a benefit, because they can pick you up, which is good. Right. Felice, down here.
So I'm really looking forward to reading this book. As someone who's done professional sports for 12 years, I just want to say, because I know figure skating, and so I know the science quite well, and whenever I discuss this with people, I can already say many of the things, because I've been told that my menstrual cycle will do this and that to everything my whole life. But each time I do bring these things up, and I get quite angry, people will say, but this sports thing is kind of a privilege anyways. And the fact that, and that women's sports, the people that complain about it are just a bunch of privileged brats, and people don't really care because of that. And I just wonder what you say to that. It's not really, it's something that makes me very angry. I know what I think about it, but I'd like to hear your thoughts.
Well, it's a career, isn't it? Especially someone like figure skating, because ultimately there's a professional circuit out there too. So the more successful you are in your competitive career, the more you're going to get opportunities, to, I don't know, be Cinderella, dancing for Disney, whatever. There's all this, there is a career. And that's the thing about sport nowadays. Sport is not a hobby. We're not training 6 hours a day, 10 years of our life, giving everything up because it's a hobby. We're doing it because it is a profession, and we are 100% committed to it. And we are no less committed to it than the male skaters are. Right? So, it's, it's just horrible, isn't it, to hear that kind of stuff. It's rubbish. Just don't accept it. Don't accept it. That's all I can say to you is keep going. Because you do. The other thing is we have the vast majority of people behind us. If you just ask your friends, they will all say we believe in being kind and let people identify as however they want. But a good 90% of the general public believe in fair sport. So that's the other thing that really boggles me, you know, is why is the consensus out there in the general public is that why are we here? How is this still being pushed through? And the only thing I can come back to is just the bloody money all the time, you know, behind everything, the points that they're getting, or the financial companies that own the hedge funds, or whatever the hell is going on, you know. And when you start to unpeel the layers, it really is quite scary. I mean, you know, and some of you in the room will have done that. Some won't, but some of you will have done a lot of that peeling. And you just get to one layer above, to the next layer above. And eventually you get to two massive companies that are based in North America and that own an awful lot and have an awful lot of power.
I wonder as well, though, whether we're just less comfortable culturally with excellence, and that we're much more, we like to see brave or struggle or suffer much more than we like to see simple excellence, because that's what we're seeing.
I don't know. I mean, you know, again, we go back to this, you know, let's just take ITV doing their documentary on Emily Bridges. You know, poor Emily Bridges can't do this, poor Emily Bridges can't do that. Poor Emily Bridges was racing with the guys 6 months before that, had no problem at all, has always been included. What about the poor girl who lost her place on the team?
Yeah.
They're not even not interested in that. They're not interested in the girl that's been shoved aside in her own category of sport for someone who's been racing as a male reasonably successfully, and no one's taking that away from them, you know, for a very long time. We're only allowed to feel sorry for one group of people.
Yeah, and those girls disappear, though, don't they, as well? That's the problem, is there's a kind of this sort of melting away of the other story.
Yeah. We see, I mean, this is what we see, like, there's no harm. Where's the harm? It's just one, it's just two, it's just 50 in cycling now. It's just one, and you speak in the book about Laurel Hubbard and weightlifting. It was just one mediocre man, but the women he displaced had fought so hard and so strongly to be part of that Olympic, you know, circuit and the Olympic platform. And when people say, where's the harm? It's like, you're not even looking at the women who are being harmed. I know. You're just saying, oh.
And when someone says to you, well, it's only one, why is one less important than 50 or 100 or 500? Do you mean unfairness is unfairness? It doesn't matter if it only affects one. It still has to be fair.
And it was one 43-year-old
male. No male advantage
with
at all.
20-year-old superb females.
And if you remember that lovely interview with the girls, I mean, that tells you exactly what they were able to say and not able to say. Yeah. Right? Those girls wanted to tell you how they felt, and they said it with no thank you.
No.
And that's all they could do, but that's what they did. You know, and we all know that, but yeah.
But at some point, the story's got to, well, this is what you're doing, the story's got to come out and be told. In all of those situations, people need to feel that they can tell the story. So, yes, I think it's probably be 2, 3 more, and then we'll finish.
I wanted to come back to the question of how you get out of this. And I think when you were talking at the start, you made this distinction. You said something along the lines of you need to be exclusive to be inclusive, which I thought was actually a really nice idea, because it implies categories and boundaries between things and discriminating between different sections of society or aspects of life and so on and so forth. And it just strikes me that that's a very difficult thing to do these days, because societal-wise, we seem predisposed to kind of run away from making any sort of judgments or decisions. I mean, way before you get anywhere near an adult sports field, kids are brought up, and, you know, where's right and wrong, where's you don't pass and fail anymore pretty much in exams. Everything, even the way through your school, seems to dissolve all the categories that we used to have. Yeah. So would quite an important place to start be to start young and to start being a bit more assertive about the different categories and boundaries that we need to impose right the way throughout society?
Yeah, which isn't going to help with, you know, if primary schools are doing away with them, is it? You know, it's just about the worst starting point of all, to be honest with you. And it's the thing that we've taken sort of competitiveness out of our young people's lives, and yet the first time they go for a job interview and don't get it, what happens? And they don't have that resilience then to go, oh, well, it's a learning experience. How did I do that interview? Where did I go wrong? And I go to my next interview. So we have this massive increase in mental health issues. You know, and I know it's related to social media and all sorts of things, and it's incredibly complicated to mix it all up. But it is really scary, you know, what is happening to young people and their mental health. And if you look along, you know, on the lines of smartphones, it literally goes like this. You know, and the number of young people that are on antidepressants in America at the moment is just astronomical. Yeah, back to pharmaceutical companies.
I think if you're able to say a little bit more to young people, no, you don't belong in that category. Sorry, no. You know, that's not your category. But we are shying away from that. That category excludes you. That exclusion, that word is not scary. That word includes other people. That's kind of a bit of maybe a philosophical argument to teach to primary schools. But you know, saying no and saying, no, you can't do that.
No, that's a good word. We don't use it very much.
But it also only makes sense if the point is competition. So my kids never had a competitive sports day. They'd go to Crystal Palace Stadium, throw pool noodles as
that was
javelin.
the 70s, wasn't it?
None of it was competitive. So
well, a lot of primary schools still do that. You'd be amazed. You know, they still do the round robin, goodness knows what rubbish.
Where's the microphone? So lady here, lady there, and then we'll final remarks. And then
what I find fascinating with all of that as well is like we test our kids to death in the classroom, don't we?
Yeah.
You know, but the moment they go outside, we couldn't possibly test them because that would scar them for life.
Hello, my name's Michelle. Feels like an Alcoholics Anonymous meeting, Sen. I'm the former Director of Ethics and Anti-Doping at UK Sport, and as one or two people in the room might know, I made a bit of an error when I invited Werner Franke, who published the Stasi files, but only in German, and I paid for them to be published in English. And as a consequence, after 20 years of Director of Ethics and Anti-Doping at UK Sport, I run my own company called Sporting Integrity. And the one thing I would say is that you have to be true to your integrity. That's what you have to keep. And I've fought continuously to get mixed martial arts to embrace the, thank you, Kathy, thank you, Emma, the whole idea of a trans policy, because somebody's going to get killed in that cage if they don't. I've fought continuously to try and make TUEs fair, because yes, trans athletes are entitled to a TUE on testosterone. They're just not entitled to compete in the women's category. And that's the end of it. It's a very simple thing, and children know that. They know the difference between right and wrong. All power to you, Sharron. It's been a great pleasure.
Oh, Michelle fought for me when we were trying to get the BOA, British Olympic Association, to present to the IOC, and the head of the BOA at that particular time lied to my face, lied to Michelle's face. It was all during the Stasi stuff when it was going on. This lady's amazing. So, yeah.
Do you know what? I think on that note we will end because, sorry, I'm really sorry. You can tell your question.
I will sign stuff though, and if you've got any questions.
Yeah, so that's why we want to get downstairs so that you can first of all have a glass of wine, and then the other thing is that you can join the Free Speech Union. So there will be people in this room who will tell you why it's such a brilliant thing to join, either because you think you yourself may need it, or because you want to support us to help other people. That's why people join us. So do make use of the leaflets that are on your chairs. So finally, I need to get Sharron to assert in the room. I just really want to congratulate Sharron and Craig on the book. It is brilliant. I read it Sunday and Monday, and it's a really, really fantastic read. It's got loads and loads of just really, really interesting background that you need, and ammunition, I would say, which is really going to be really important going forward. So can we have a massive round of applause for Sharron, and for Emma, and for Kathy,